Hello and welcome to the Event Bestie, the show that unlocks the magic of event planning by taking you behind and before the scenes. I'm your host, award-winning event planner and creative, Tanya Hales. In today's episode, I'm pulling the curtain back on me, how we got here and why the Event Bestie is a good investment of your folding laundry time. I'm very proud of you, by the way. Act 1, the beginning. In the movie Brown Sugar, the main character asks, when did you first fall in love with hip-hop? I'm going to borrow from that to ask myself the very same question. When did I first fall in love with events? But in order to get to that answer, we have to go back a little bit. I went to school to study criminology. As a girl who grew up watching Columbo and Perry Mason and Law & Order, of course I was going to become a lawyer. And then by the time I got to undergrad and was starting to apply for law schools, and found out that some of my law school courses were going to have to be in French, I decided that was a no merci and decided not to go down that path. That was a relief on one hand, but very scary on the other, because then I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do, where I was going to land, where I was going to work, and who I was going to be. I ended up at a job at the Ottawa Food Bank doing agency relations. The job there was to go around to different community organizations, soup kitchens, shelters, to see if we were serving them in the right ways, if there was things that we could be doing better, and everything that they needed in order to serve the community. What I loved best about that job was that it had purpose beyond just getting a paycheck. And so I knew I wanted to pursue other pursuits in the charitable and nonprofit space. When I moved back home, my event career began at a 3-month contract job at Big Brothers Big Sisters of York in 2003. I'm trying to think of what I was listening to in 2003, what I was wearing in 2003. We're just going to pretend that those fashion faux pas does not exist. The job I was hired to do was primarily for their signature event, Bowl for Kids' Sake. It's an annual event that every Big Brothers Big Sister organization does, because bowl, kids, goes together like peanut butter and jelly. The unique situation of Big Brothers Big Sisters of York region in Ontario, Canada, was that York region is made up of 8 different towns. So it wasn't going to just be one event I was executing. I had to do 8 different Bowl for Kids' Sake events. Each town has its own mayor and council. Each Bowl for Kids' Sake had its own sponsor. The participants were different. So it really was a job that was all in from the very beginning. Another event that I had an opportunity to be a part of while I was there was 5 with Drive. 2 brothers, who were also big brothers, and 3 of their friends decided to walk all of Yonge Street as both a fundraiser and awareness raiser for Big Brothers Big Sister organizations throughout the province of Ontario. For those of you who are not well versed on Canadian geography, Yonge Street is considered, by Canadians, I think, the longest street in the world. It starts at the top of Minnesota, goes north, curves around, and ends in Toronto at Lake Ontario. It took them 40 days and 40 nights with multiple stops along the way. So it was an ever-moving event, very different from anything that I'd ever done, considering that my event planning career was basically 4 months old at that point. So thinking through, there's no event logistics for one particular place, but you have to keep track of them, connect with the local medias, connect with the local branches of the organization, and make sure that they're okay. Do you have enough socks? Do you have enough water? Are you going to make it? So it was really challenging, but so interesting, and definitely the moment that I fell in love with events. I love that every day was different. I love that I got to play and have fun and be creative, and I was never bored. A bored Tanya is not ever a good thing. So this was really, really cool, and I knew that events was definitely going to be the thing. So now I have an industry, which is charities and nonprofits, and I have a role, which is events and fundraising. Great. Now I've got a path. Let's get it. After that job ended, I ended up being there for a year and a half, so helping to execute multiple events throughout that tenure, I moved to Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation for a 1-year mat leave contract. In that 1 year, they managed to pack in all of the things. There was walks, there was rides, there was a gala, all in 1 year. And what that job taught me in particular was the art and science of time management. Just because walk was wrapping up, you couldn't be tunnel visioned and just focus on walk, because as you're off-ramping one event, you're on-ramping another one. So it's really important to know how to keep things separate, but also together in your one mind. So definitely the art of multitasking is one of the skills that event planners learn to hone very early on in their careers. After that contract was done, I moved to a smaller organization called Morelands Community Services. They provide in-city and away camp opportunities for kids who need some extra supports. And what I learned in that particular role was working with a large external committee. Group of women, I think there was about 30, who were well-to-do, well-known, well-connected. They wanted to come together and put an event on. Great. Cool. Fantastic. Now, the challenge, of course, size of the committee, very hard because you got 30 cooks in the kitchen plus my actual bosses, and got to corral them, got to corral their energy. They had champagne tastes on a beer budget. But the biggest challenge of all, where they decided to do the event. They chose a venue that wasn't finished, aka it had no walls. You heard me correctly. There were no walls. So that was fun, but they were able to say they were one of the first events in that space, which is why they really were pushing for it. And I respect them for it, because every event thereafter, from the venue perspective and future clients, they had to follow in our footsteps. The branding was excellent, really clear and simple, and the power of networks, right? We've heard the story and the saying before, your net worth is your network, or something along those lines. And that's exactly it. These are the type of women who had the type of Rolodex, I know, sounding like an old person when I say that, contact list for the younger generation. They had the type of contact list where they can just pick up the phone and say, you're buying a gala table, write me a check, and get it done. So maneuvering through that and learning and watching that was also really powerful and would prove to be fruitful for me in my future career. This is also when I started volunteering. I chaired Toast to Spring, a Canadian Cancer Event Society event. I joined a committee for a fundraiser for Ronald McDonald House. I volunteered at Luminato, which is one of Toronto's biggest arts and culture festivals, and Brazilian Ball, which was at the time one of the biggest galas in the city. For me, it was a great way to get into events I couldn't afford, but also get to see the event from the other side while also building up my resume. While I'm here, I have to make this very important note. Volunteers are the unsung heroes of all of your favorite events. All of them. No event of any significance or any size could operate without a volunteer corps. Think registration, the marshals, the coat check, the cleanup, the do you have enough water. Paying everyone to do those roles would bankrupt most events, and they would not be able to take place. And when I say all events of any significance and any size, I'm going from the Olympics to F1 races to film festivals to your favorite music festivals as well. So the next time you're out at an event and you see someone in a brightly colored t-shirt, they probably don't really want to wear it because it doesn't go with the outfit, but that's okay. They're going to wear it anyways. And it says volunteer in big, bold, blocked letters. Go up to them and say, thank you for being here. This event couldn't run without you. And I'm sure they appreciate you. Act 2, the switch. So the event industry within the nonprofit charitable sector can be very incestuous, because really you go from event coordinator to event manager to event director, and then maybe a VP of events if the organization is large enough. There's only so many nonprofits that are of that level where you would get a VP title. And normally it would also have to equate with fundraising and development, because events in the charitable sector are not just parties, they're to make some money. And people just kept moving around, and I really wanted to make sure I didn't get trapped in the charitable sector. So I started to look outwards, and I wanted to make sure that I experience all that events have to offer, and doing it from a charitable aspect is just one. There once was an event Bible called TSE Events, Toronto Special Events, and it was considered the yellow pages for event vendors in Toronto. Yes, I am once again aging myself by referencing the yellow pages. But it was very, very important. If you wanted anything from an audio-visual company to clowns to balloons to venues, that's where you went. They had a digital version, of course, but the OG was still the printed copy. And of course, if you were in the printed copy, that meant that you were one of the good ones. So I got my hands on a copy of TSE Events, went through it, and I printed out and mailed my resume to a bunch of event planning companies. The one that called me back, though, it was a plot twist. It was an event catering company. Now, I was confused because I know what section of the book that I went to, but it was going to be lesson number 1 in the vendor side of events. An offsite event catering company is different from in-house catering companies because they do often act as pseudo event planners. They're the vendor that is both client-facing and guest-facing. They're the ones who are likely on-site the longest. They work the most with other vendors, the rental companies, the staffing agencies, AV. They feed everyone from the DJs to the photographers. Most importantly, we're the timekeepers. We can't serve dinner while the father of the bride is giving a speech to his daughter. So we have to make sure that we're paying attention to what's happening in program to ensure that we're going to be timely on the food service side. So I was like, okay, it's not just about putting chicken on a plate. There really is a lot more to event catering than meets the eye. But my boss, what he wanted me to do wasn't planning events. He was one of the first full-service event catering companies in the city. And as such, over an illustrious career that spanned decades, he accumulated a lot of business cards, a lot of contacts, and he wanted that digitized. Really, I was going to be hired to be their database person, and that did not intrigue me at all. Unfortunately, in my case, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this tall, English accent, British bloke charmed me and convinced me to say yes. So I did. I said, why not? Let's try it out and see. And if it doesn't work out, I have other avenues. I can always go back to charities if I needed to. I wasn't going to be stuck. So I started there. And I was unclear about what my role really was beyond taking business cards and putting them into an Excel spreadsheet. And my coworkers were just as confused as to me, my role and my purpose. Until one of my colleagues decided to retire, I was then thrown into the pool. My big first solo event, the Camp Uchigayas Gala at the Royal Ontario Museum for 608 guests. Now, the fact that I have 608 guests still in my mind from 2008 tells you everything. And I learned and finally got to see up close and personal that events, and particularly from the event catering side, is both a dance and a military operation. You cannot have something of that size and that magnitude and fly by the seat of your pants. Sure, there's going to be some changes made and you're going to have to adapt and go with the flow of the event depending upon what's happening both inside and outside. But at the end of the day, there has to be very clear structure. You need leaders who can speak clearly and concisely and communicate. You need to be able to tell the chefs, hey, you can drop main course now. We're clearing first course. You're walkie-talkieing with the venue, someone who's watching the programming. It is very much all-encompassing, all hands on deck. you don't stop moving from the time that you get there until the time that you leave. But it was beautiful. And to this day, Camp Putugueas has a really soft place for me and is an organization. It's a camp for kids with cancer, actually, and it's an organization that I still support to this day. So I definitely am still tied to them, thankfully not for negative reasons, but just I try to support them however I can. And I've hosted an event in the building that fundraiser was focused on building, which is really, really cool. An offsite caterer, as I mentioned, we do a whole lot. We show up, we do breakfast and lunch and dinner and brunches and cocktail receptions and every other type in between. I've done a lobster fest and a horse barn in a remote town with no people around. I've done a 5-star dinner in Swarovski's back room. That's a little stressful when you have chefs trying to finish plating and make pretty and serve people surrounded by very expensive crystals. You learn how to not be the bull in the china shop. And closing night parties for the Toronto International Film Festival of, me and the 3,000 of my closest friends. I've been in the homes of the rich, wealthy, and famous, and I've been witness to countless unions of families. I would like to say also that I have only ever cried once, and I'm very proud of that statistic. I learned throughout my career there that event planning is also all about relationships. I think every industry is. You cannot be successful if you don't build them properly, but more importantly in the event space, because the event is not just ever going to be one entity. It is going to be the combination of multiple. So I had the rental company, shout out to Chairman Mills, on speed dial, and they've had to put spoons in a taxi cab for me. I've been screened by the RCMP, and I've even had to pre-plan a funeral reception. Now I know you're saying, say more words about putting spoons in a taxi cab and how do you pre-plan a funeral? So when you're doing an event downtown and the rental company is uptown and you're setting the tables and you realize that you are short spoons that you're going to need for dessert, you have 2 options. You can go and buy spoons, which why would I do that? I don't have the money for that. Or you can call up the rental company dispatch and say, I need 36 spoons. This is my address. This is my order number. Put them in a taxi for me, please and thank you. And one of the key things for event planning is you have to decide in those kinds of moments, do you have the time or the money to fix the problem? Because sometimes it's not about the money, right? Sometimes it is about timing. I once had an event where it was a holiday Christmas party for an advertising agency. They were drinking vodka like it was nobody's business. And they were like, hey, can we go get more vodka? And I'm like, the liquor store is closed. Thank you so very much for handing me this Amex card, in which they would have entrusted me to go get more alcohol, but there is no other place to go get alcohol, especially in the city of Toronto and province of Ontario. You can only get alcohol from one source. So that one source is closed. I cannot fix the problem of having more alcohol at your event. This is why you overbuy instead of underbuying, because you can always return things. We'll talk about that later. As for pre-planning a funeral reception, let's just say that when your last name is on 1/3 of the world's supply of French fries, you don't do small things. When you are friendly with prime ministers and heads of state, you know that there's going to be an outpouring of people who are going to want to pay their respects and be in the room, being seen as being in the room. And there's something small at the house, but then there's also a larger reception for the people who can't get invited to the house. But that was one of the weirdest things that I've ever had to partake in terms of just waiting for this man to die so that we could activate. I'm still in awe of it when I really think about it. But, when it comes to certain people at a certain level of wealth and power, this is just what it is, right? And it may seem very morbid, and living it felt morbid, but it is also very understandable, because things like getting a liquor license, you can't get that, in 2 hours. Well, now you can, but back in the day, you couldn't. So you do have to somewhat plan for these things and start ordering the alcohol and start preparing the chefs and ordering the food. You know that it's coming. You know that it's imminent. So you just have to stay ready so you don't have to get ready, as the old adage says. Also during this time, though, of working in this event catering company and being all over the place and doing all the things, I also became a mother. And that was really difficult. Events means early mornings to make sure the coffee percolates and late nights and last calls at the bar. You don't really see a lot of moms with young kids in the industry. And of course, it makes sense. You need to be able to pick up and go. You need to be able to work 12, 15, 17-hour days. You need to be able to run out if there's an emergency, if a service staff is down, if someone has forgotten something. It is very much an event industry and a work environment that does not jive well with being the mom of a toddler. And yet I was. And so I had to lean upon the people in my village, whether it was friends, family, the lady who was watching my son in the daycare, to say, hey, can I drop him off early? Are you okay with me picking him up a little bit later so that I can do my job? Because we know as soon as motherhood starts impeding upon job performance, that's when your career trajectory can either stop or stall. And I didn't want that for myself. And I wanted to make sure that I could show up as much as I possibly could. But it was definitely a challenge. And, really hope that if there's any event folks who also have kiddos that are listening, know that I see you, know that I know how hard it is, and I'm sure that you're rocking it. But if you're not, just lean on your village. That's what they're there for. Lastly, of this era, I won't say that I have a favorite event or client, but that's mostly just in case that they're listening. But I do have a few memorable moments that stand out for me. One was trying on a $75,000 ring in Cartier when we did the Chinese New Year's reception. Now, the most stressful moment of my life, besides childbirth, I think, was when it was a little too snug and it wasn't coming off. And I'm like, do you have a saw? Because you can take the finger. I don't think I need it if you want the ring back. But what I loved about that event in particular, it wasn't just being in this store that I would never walk in ordinarily, of course. It was more so that it really was so smart. It was really strategic. They know their audience, so they are willing to invest in putting this reception together, closing the store a little bit early, making people feel very special, very VIP. The people who shop in Cartier, that is what they want. That is what is associated with the brand. And so hosting that event, really getting to see, okay, how do you connect the dots between making sales and doing this event? And one ring would have paid for that cocktail reception many times over. So it really was an investment. And for a lot of folks who come to me wanting to plan an event or gather their audience in some way, shape, or form, you have to think, your ROI may not necessarily be immediate. Sometimes you hope it to be. But how are you fostering and cultivating relationships with folks who are being invited into the room? So in that way, your ROI does become a little bit faster. I loved the Nine West Canada Fairy Tale Forest launch. Well, first of all, I'm a shoe and purse girly, so that was definitely an event I needed to be a part of. But what I loved most, and hopefully my voice conveys, was the magic of it. It had trees, it had moss, it had, wood carvings and cutouts. On the tables has place settings. They turned a glass concrete museum into this magical forest. And I loved every second of it. It was so beautiful, and I felt transported. And the menu aligned with the theme of the event. And that's the magic, right? That's the part where that's a venue I was in almost every day, at least once a week, and saw it in so many different ways. But that was the one time where I walked in, I'm like, I'm not in a museum, I'm in a forest. And that's what Nine West wanted their guests to feel. And I, as a vendor, felt it. Last but not least, a definite standout for my event catering career was the electrical fire on a wedding day, but that's just going to be a teaser because that's a different story for a different episode. Act 3, Tanya goes solo. So while I'm working in this event catering company, I'm all over the city of Toronto. I'm rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous. I'm doing all sorts of things. Loved it. I loved learning from the chefs about food from different cultures around the world. I learned that food is a unifier. You know, we have more in common than we do not. Every culture on the planet has a meat and potatoes dish, has some sort of one-pot rice dish, has some sort of dumpling stuffed with something, serves some sort of bread with some sort of dipping sauce. Every culture. We just call it something different and season it with local ingredients. But I loved learning so much about food, what is unique to a particular province. You know, I learned about Saskatoon berries. I learned about sumac. I loved learning. I loved the environment. I loved being fed by chefs every day, by the way. I loved that part. Now having to pack a lunch for myself, big bonus. But the environment was difficult. It could be really stressful, both mentally and physically. And so after my final wedding, 35 guest Winter Wonderland wedding in December 2015, I went on stress leave. At that time, on the side, I was thinking I was going to try and become a writer. I always enjoyed the art of writing when I was in high school, and blogs are starting to become a thing, and people are starting to be able to, you know, earn some clout and some money from their writing. So I decided I want to take a stab at it. And I volunteered for a startup out of the Bay Area that was focused on Black media and really telling the stories for the Black community. When I was having a conversation with the founder about me taking a leave from work, she said to me simply, well, we're going to start doing events. Do you want to do them? I remember that conversation so vividly because it was February 2016, so I'm a few months into my stress leave, not quite sure where I'm going to land. And all of a sudden, now I'm having client/job interviews unexpectedly. And so the answer, of course, was yes. So I went on the Googles, and in March 2016, I incorporated and opened my own event planning agency. Now, that was March 2016. Their first event, May 2016. And the date was already set. Oh, and did I mention it's also going to be in New York City, and I live in Toronto. So my very first client event was planning an event across the border and with none of the same relationships and foundations that I've been building for the past 10 years in Toronto. There's no rental company I can just call up. There's no venue that I know inside and out. Everything is from scratch. But that was the exciting part of the challenge, was being able to say, okay, let me put to work everything that I've already learned in my previous decade of doing events. I can do this. I can do this. And we did it. One of the funniest moments of that particular event was going to the dollar store to buy the decor for the event. I needed 5 buggies. The cashier probably wanted to murder me. And then I had to put all of those bags into an Uber van because I didn't drive at the time, take it all home, box it all up, get it all to FedEx, and ship it down to New York City. With the exchange rate, I saved the client hundreds of dollars by doing this. But why did I do that? Why did I go that extra mile when I could have just gone on Etsy or Party City or ordered things when I got to the city? One, I know for me, events is very tactile. I wanted to see what those glass marbles looked in the vases that were going to go on the table. I wanted to know what the texture of the linens or the tablecloths that were going to be. I wanted to know all the fun stuff, the little photo booth area decor stuff that I was going to get. I really don't remember what else I bought that cost that much money. But either which way, moral of the story is, and also to show that to the client, their budget was very personal to me. Right? I took that as seriously as if it was spending my own money to put this event on. It was their first foray into events. So they were going to want to have to make a good impression as well. And I wanted to make sure I did as much as I possibly can to help them showcase themselves, but also showcase myself. So that was a lot of fun. And one other core memory of that particular event, Empower Her 2016, was who we had on the stages. And when I see where they've ascended to now, they've become the editors-in-chiefs of major media publications. They've become New York Times bestsellers. They've become founders of their own fashion lines. They were put on these stages before they were known. You know, they were their infancy of their beautiful careers. And not to say that I had anything to do with their careers, but I love that we were able to celebrate them before it was easy to do and before it was common for people to do. And I look back on that event with a lot of pride, and especially when I see the speakers and what they're doing today. The second event for that client was just a mere few months later. We had 3 months to plan the very first Afrotech, and that was also a ton of fun, but also very stressful, because now it's not about planning an event cross-border. The border presents its own challenges, sure, but I'm a girl in the Toronto Eastern Standard Time Zone, and this is now a Bay Area client in the Bay Area event, which means I'm going from waking up at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and my day's going until 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the challenges of being a parent while now running my own event planning agency, they did not ever go away. The same challenges I had as being an employee, I had as an entrepreneur. And there was a lot of back and forth, and we'd have to do things. I remember that Afrotech 2017, it was the equivalent of 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I had to stop the walkthrough with the client to say, hey, I need to read my son his bedtime story so he can go to sleep. And I sat on the floor in this beautiful venue and read him something Trains or something Dr. Seuss. I'm not even sure. And I had the physical book with me to do this through FaceTime. Technology is amazing. And shout out to it for helping parents parent from afar. So it definitely was a ton of things that had to go into it, to the point where the last event that I did with them, which was 2019, I just brought my son with me, because planning his logistics and planning the logistics of a multi-day, multi-million-dollar event was just becoming too much. And it was just so much easier to have him there, have a friend look after him, so that I didn't have to think about anything else but executing the best event that I could. My previous employment prepared me to be a good planner. It's a lot of peace in that sentence. But I was not prepared on running an event planning business. I just hit the ground running, right? I was like, okay, here's what I think I should be making based off of the Google search. And I didn't know, is a retainer better than hourly? What about non-compete clauses and contracts? There was a lot of things that I was just learning while I was going. And if I could go back and redo it all, I would say I would just reach out to more people, you know, in the industry. I had friends. Why wasn't I talking to them? I don't know. And maybe get some business coaching as well, just in terms of, okay, here's how you set up your business for success. So that way, at some point in time, you can scale. And it's not just about you being on site. You can send other people to do things for you on your company's behalf, etc. But when I look back on what Summit 21 became and what Afrotech has become, I'm immensely proud. And all my other clients and other client events that I did until the pandemic forced me into retirement, because without the event catering company, without Bowl for Kids' Sake, I would not have been able to do what I've done, be where I've been, and experience what I've experienced. And I'm very grateful. In summary, now, this is the part of the podcast where I'm going to recap and maybe drop some takeaways. They're not always going to be super tangible, but I always aim for tangible takeaways. I think it's really important that people leave an event or a podcast having learned something. You know, I want to make it worth your while. Some of them are going to be inspirational, motivational, and some of them are going to be, hey, download this, look up this person, do this thing. Since this episode is all about me and my career, there's not going to be a ton of tacticals, but we'll go with it. First one, you can't dictate your path, but your path will lead you to where you want to be. If I had been so focused on going to law school and becoming a lawyer, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. Well, I'm sitting. I don't know what you're doing. You might be driving or doing dishes or something. But we can be so focused on the thing that we said we were going to do that we don't pivot. And then we don't allow ourselves to adapt our life's plan, our life's goals, etc. So that's really important. Number 2, you can pursue your passions and still be paid. That was one of the myths that people always projected onto me. They're like, oh, how do you get paid? When I was working in the charitable sector. What do you mean, how do I get paid? I get paid. I'm not a volunteer. Not every single charitable organization is just run on passion of volunteers. Many of them are, but a lot of them aren't. You know, the United Way is a charity, but it is also a multi-million-dollar corporation, right? It just has its primary function of serving people versus profits and shareholders. Relationships don't need to be transactional from the start to be fruitful. If that startup that I had started writing for and eventually stopped writing for, that I parted ways or burned a bridge, I would not have had an event planning company. I would have gone on stress leave and stressed about where to go next, where to land next. I may have even regressed. I may have taken a pay cut to go back to the charitable sector. Who knows? Or would have maybe tried to do something completely different. But I was allowed to be in the space that I was really good in because I built a relationship. And that's really important. I think that in this day and age, everyone wants to connect on LinkedIn and immediately, can you do this for me? Or can you go here for me? Or can you show up for this for me? Or can you share this for me? And not understanding that relationships are supposed to be reciprocal. If you find yourself always doing the asking, but never, hey, what do you need? How can I help you? Then you are not building reciprocal relationships and it will eventually show. Last but not least, volunteering is a great way to support events, but also get access to your faves. I know on my to-do list, on my bucket list, is volunteering at an F1 race, mostly because I need to see Lewis Hamilton up close and personal. And right now I don't have see Lewis Hamilton up close and personal monies, but my hands, my feet, my eyeballs, that's my currency that I can give to the race or the entity that's putting on the race. And hopefully it works out. I'll keep you guys posted. And that's a wrap. Oh my gosh, the first episode in the books. I am a little emotional, y'all. I won't lie. I'm so grateful that you decided to stick with me, stick through this. Hopefully you learned something. You chuckled a couple of times. You walked on a journey with me. I took you to a forest. I took you to Cartier. I took you to a whole lot of different places. And that is the overall point of this particular podcast. If you liked it, slide over to that subscribe button. I love alliteration. Words are my love language. So I know it's real. Until next time, we'll keep the red carpet ready for you.